Around 14,000 years ago, in a cold cave in the west of England, someone you would probably call a monster picked up a human skull. They scraped it clean. They cut away the face. They smoothed the broken edges with a sharp piece of stone, slow and careful, the way you'd sand a piece of wood you actually cared about. And then they turned it over, lifted it to their mouth, and drank. It wasn't the skull of an enemy. It wasn't a trophy carried home from some far-off raid. The teeth marks on the bones found right next to it match one very specific, very intimate kind of eater. Not a wolf, not a hyena, not a cave bear, something far closer to home. No war, no famine, no starving last resort. These people had food. They had tools. They had reindeer bones piled in the same cave. They chose to do this. And by the end of this, you'll know exactly who they ate, why they did it, and why it might just be the most human thing anyone has ever done. Because the closer scientists look at this, the less it looks like horror, and the more it starts to look like grief. Stay with me, because this is going to change the way you think about your own funeral. But here's the part that's actually insane. The cave is real. You can walk into it. It's called Go's Cave, tucked into the cliffs of Cheddar Gorge in Somerset, the same quiet green corner of England that's famous for cheese. About 14,700 years ago, as the last ice age was finally loosening its grip on the world, a group of humans lived here. We call them the Magdalenians. They were Homo sapiens. They were us. The same brain, the same hands, the same capacity for love and grief and fear that you're carrying around in your body right now. And in the dirt of that cave, archaeologists found something that stopped them cold. Human skulls, but not whole ones, and not simply smashed open ones either. These had been worked, shaped. The faces and the heavy base of each skull had been carefully cut away, and what was left behind was the smooth, rounded dome of the cranium turned into a container, a bowl, a cup made out of a person's head. And not just one of them, at least three. Here's the detail that destroys the easy explanation. Roughly 90% of the natural shape of each skull cup was kept perfectly intact. Think about what that means. If all you wanted was to crack a head open and scoop out the brain to eat, you'd smash it. Fast, messy, done in seconds. That is not what happened here. Someone took their time. Someone chipped away the rough edges. Someone shaped these and cleaned these and made these to be used again and again. You do not craft a cup out of a person you never thought about. And it gets stranger the closer you look. Because scientists did look closer. A lot closer. A researcher named Sylvia Bello and her team at the Natural History Museum in London put these bones under a microscope and read them like a crime scene laid out across 14,000 years. And what they found was a level of skill and care that is genuinely unsettling. The marks on the bone weren't the wild, ragged hacking of panic. They were fine, precise, deliberate cut marks placed exactly where you would cut if your goal was to remove every bit of flesh from the bone as cleanly as possible. The heads had been carefully skinned, the cheeks stripped, even the tongue had been cut out and taken. The lower jaws had been worked over to remove every last scrap of muscle and tissue. And then there were the other marks, the small ones, the faint ones on the smaller bones, the bones of the hands, the fingers, the ribs. Human tooth marks. People had chewed on these bones. They'd cracked them with their own teeth. They'd gnawed the ends and sucked them, the way you'd absent-mindedly clean the last bit of meat off a rib without even noticing you're doing it. And the pattern is unmistakable, because a human bite leaves a different signature than any animal on Earth. We chew differently. We leave a fingerprint in the marks, and that fingerprint is all over these bones. And there's one more object from that cave I still haven't told you about. Among all the worked bones, archaeologists found a human forearm bone, a radius, covered in a careful zigzag pattern. Not butchery marks, not accidents, a design. Someone had deliberately engraved the bone of a dead person with the very same kind of pattern they carved into their finest tools and ornaments. And think about what that means. You don't decorate garbage. You don't carve a careful design into something you're about to throw in the trash. You do that to something that matters, something you mean to keep and hold and look at and remember. And here's something that makes these people impossible to wave away as strangers. In that exact same cave, years later, archaeologists found a complete human skeleton, around 10,000 years old. They named him Cheddar Man. And when scientists finally pulled DNA out of his ancient bones, they matched it against people living in the nearby village today, and they found his direct relatives, living descendants. Ordinary people in modern England who share blood with someone who lived and died in that cave. So the skull cup makers are not some alien species out of a horror film. They are somebody's however many greats' grandparents. The line that runs from them to us was never once broken. It runs straight through, generation after generation, all the way down to you. So the obvious question, were they just hungry? It's the very first place your mind goes, and it should. Desperate people, a brutal killing winter, no food anywhere, and the unthinkable slowly becomes the only thing left. It has happened in recorded history more than once. Starving expeditions trapped in the snow, cities under siege for years, shipwrecked sailors lost at sea. When the body is truly dying, the brain quietly rewrites every rule it ever held sacred. We know this. We've documented it. But that is not what this cave is telling us. These were not starving people scraping the very bottom of survival. We know that because the same layers of earth that held the skull cups also held something else. The bones of horse, of red deer, of wild reindeer, animal bones, hunted food, and flint blades for butchering all of it. They had a working pantry. They were, by the harsh standards of the Ice Age, eating well. This wasn't a last resort. This wasn't murder for meat. This was a deliberate choice made by well-fed people, carried out slowly and skillfully on the bodies of their own kind, while there was deer to eat 10 feet away. And the second you truly accept that, the whole thing tilts beneath you. Because if it wasn't hunger and it wasn't war, then it had to be something else. Something with meaning behind it. Something that mattered enough to do by hand in the cold to the body of someone who had a name. To understand it, you have to forget almost everything you know about death. Forget hospitals, forget hospice, forget funeral homes and embalming and the soft, clean, distant machinery we've built around dying. For you, death is a managed event. A person stops breathing in one building, and days later they reappear, washed, dressed, painted to look almost asleep in another building entirely. And in between those two moments, you are never asked to touch anything. You never see the part that's hard to look at. Strangers handle that quietly, behind doors you will never walk through. For almost all of human history, none of that existed. Death happened in your arms. The person you loved most went still and then went cold against your own skin in the night by the fire, with nowhere else to take them. And then you, personally, with your own two hands, had to decide what came next for the body of someone you would never hear speak again. Picture it for yourself just for a second. You're in that cave. The fire has burned down low. The person lying beside you, someone you have known your entire life, has just gone quiet for the very last time. Outside, the wind is screaming and the ground is frozen solid as rock. There are wolves out there in the dark, hyenas. And the cold itself will take the body and freeze it, and when the thaw comes, the scavengers will find it and drag what's left of them across the rocks, and you will never know where the pieces of the person you loved finally ended up. That is the real choice in front of you. There is no funeral home, no quiet plot of grass under a tree. No one is coming to handle this for you. There is only you, the cold, the dark, and the body of someone you cannot stand to lose. So what do you actually do? Where, in that entire frozen world, can you possibly keep them safe? And slowly, terribly, there turns out to be only one answer. Only one place that nothing, not the wolves, not the cold, not even time, can ever take them from again. Now think about that for a second. Really sit inside it. There's a thing anthropologists call funerary cannibalism, or endocannibalism, eating your own dead, not as an act of violence and not out of hunger, but as an act of devotion. And here's what should genuinely surprise you. It is not rare in human history. It shows up again and again, across wildly different cultures, on nearly every inhabited continent on the planet. Too often in too many separate places to be written off as some isolated madness. And we don't just have to guess at why, because some peoples were still doing it within living memory, where anthropologists could sit with them and ask them and actually understand. And when anthropologists finally asked, the answer was the last thing on earth anyone expected. There's a people in the Amazon rainforest of Brazil called the Wari, and well into the 20th century, when one of them died, the community did not bury the body, they ate it. The close family, the very people who loved the dead person most, were the ones expected to consume the roasted flesh. An anthropologist named Bate Conklin spent years living among them, and she asked them gently, again and again, why they did it, and their answer turned everything inside out. To the Wari, leaving a loved one's body to rot alone in the cold, wet ground was the single cruelest, most heartless thing a person could possibly do. It was monstrous to them, unthinkable. Burial meant abandoning someone you loved to the worms and the mud and the dark all by themselves forever. Eating the body, taking it into the warmth of the people who loved them, was the compassionate choice. The loving one, the kind one. They wept while they did it. It was their funeral, and every bite was an act of grief, swallowed through tears. So read that again slowly. To them, the thing you do, lowering a body into a hole in the ground and walking away from it, was the horror. And the thing they did was the tenderness. The exact act that turns your stomach was, to them, the deepest love a human being could possibly give another. But here's where it gets even closer to home. Because Homo sapiens weren't the only humans who did this. Go to a cave called El Sidrón in northern Spain and you'll find the bones of a Neanderthal family, around a dozen of them. Men, women, and children who died together roughly 49,000 years ago, and their bones carry the same story. Cut marks, cracked open long bones, split to get at the marrow inside. The signs of cannibalism on our closest cousins, the other humans who walked this earth alongside us. For a long time, that was used as proof that Neanderthals were brutes, savages, the dumb, violent dead end of the human story. But the more we learned about Neanderthals, the harder that became to believe. These were people who buried their dead, who cared for their injured and their old, keeping alive members of the group who couldn't have survived alone, who made jewelry and used pigment and may have painted on cave walls before we ever set foot in Europe. So which was it? Were they monsters who ate each other, or were they people who loved each other? And what if that question was wrong from the very start? What if the answer is both at the very same time? But this is where it gets genuinely dark. Because not all cannibalism in our past was tender, not even close, and if you go back far enough, the story changes its face completely. Deep in the caves of Atapuerca in northern Spain, there are human bones nearly 800,000 years old. They belong to a different, much older human species, called Homo antecessor. And those bones were butchered in a way that is genuinely chilling, because they were treated exactly the same as the animal bones found lying right beside them. No special treatment, no careful skull cups, no ritual at all. The bodies were processed like prey. Skinned, cut, the bones cracked open, the marrow scooped out, and then the remains were simply tossed into the same pile of garbage as the deer and the bison. For those ancient humans, other humans weren't family to be honored. They were food. Meat that happened to talk right up until the moment it didn't. And it didn't stop 800,000 years ago either. At a site called Herxheim in Germany, archaeologists uncovered the remains of hundreds of people, processed on what looks like an almost industrial scale. Skulls turned into cups there too, but everything about it feels colder, faster, stripped of the patient grief you find at Go's cave. Some researchers think these may have been outsiders, captives, enemies. So now you've got two faces staring back at you out of the exact same act. One is a grieving family, hands trembling, holding on to someone they could not bear to lose. The other is a predator looking at its own species and seeing nothing but a meal. Same bones, same bite marks, two completely different souls behind the same set of teeth. This isn't about how primitive they were. This isn't about how lucky you are to be born in a warm house with a full fridge. This is about how razor-thin the line has always been between reverence and horror, and how the only thing that separates them is the why. Now here's what nobody tells you about your own body. Eating the dead carried a hidden price, a monster you could never see, hiding inside the very people you were trying to honor. And it leads to one of the strangest facts written into your own DNA at this exact moment. There's a people called the Four who live in the remote highlands of Papua New Guinea, and up until about the middle of the 20th century, they practiced funerary cannibalism for real in the modern world, where scientists could finally watch it happen and understand what it actually meant. When a member of the community died, the family ate the body, not out of cruelty, not out of hunger. It was an act of love and mourning and respect. To be eaten by the people who loved you was far better than being left to rot alone in the ground. The women and the children, in particular, ate the brain. And then they began to die. A strange and terrible disease swept through them. The Four called it kuru, a word that means to shake, to tremble. It attacked the brain itself. It slowly stole control of the body. People began to shiver and lose their balance. Then they lost the ability to stand, then to walk, then to eat, then even to swallow. And then they died, almost always within a single year of the first tremor, and it struck the women and the children far, far more often than the men. The exact same people who had been eating the brains of the dead. The cause wasn't a virus, it wasn't bacteria, it was something stranger and more frightening than either, a prion. A single twisted, misfolded protein that hides inside nervous tissue and most of all inside the brain. And when another brain takes that protein in, the prion forces the healthy proteins around it to fold the wrong way too, like one rotten idea spreading from mind to mind until nothing is left intact. There is no cure. You can't kill it with heat. You can't kill it with time. By lovingly eating their dead, the Four were passing a slow, silent, invisible death down from one generation into the next. And here is the twist that ties it straight back to those skull cups in England. When scientists studied human DNA from populations all across the entire planet, they found something they did not expect. A specific gene variant that protects the body against prion diseases. A built-in defense. And it isn't rare or local. It's spread through human groups all over the world. And the most likely reason a defense like that would spread so widely is chilling. It means that somewhere deep in our shared past, cannibalism was common enough and went on for long enough that surviving it actually shaped our entire species. Your body right now may still be carrying the genetic scar of a habit your ancestors had tens of thousands of years ago. You are, in a small and literal way, descended from the ones who ate the dead and lived. Which raises a much harder question, not about them, about you. Why does this feel so monstrous to you? Why does a skull cup turn your stomach, while an urn of ashes on a shelf doesn't even make you blink? And the honest answer isn't that you're more civilized than they were. It's that you have been protected from death your whole life in a way that no human being before roughly the last 100 years was ever protected. Be honest, you have almost certainly never seen a dead body that wasn't first prepared, cleaned, and arranged by a paid professional. You've never had to wash one yourself. You've never had to decide what happens to the flesh of someone you love. For you, death is something that gets handled quietly, efficiently, by strangers, in rooms you will never set foot in. Ancient humans had no such mercy and no such distance. Death was in the home. Death was on their hands. A child grew up seeing with their own eyes exactly what a body becomes and exactly what the people who loved that body chose to do next. They weren't numb to death. They were the complete opposite. They were forced to face it, to hold it, to answer it in a way that would shatter most modern people where they stand. So stay with me, because this is where everything flips. Remember the question from the very beginning, the intimate eater, the teeth that left their small, careful marks on the bones in Go's cave, the closest predator of all, the one I told you was nearer to home than any wolf or hyena. It was family. The marks came from parents, from children, from the people who shared their fire every single night of their lives. They didn't eat strangers. They didn't eat their enemies. They ate their grandmother, their son, the friend they had hunted beside for 20 years. They picked up the broken pieces of a skull that used to smile at them across the flames, and they smoothed the edges down by hand slowly in the cold. And they kept it, and they drank from it, so that the person it had once belonged to would never, ever be fully gone. No grave to walk away from, no cold ground, no distance, no final goodbye that meant the end of everything. Just the people they loved, kept close, in the most literal way one human body can ever hold another. That was the monster in the cave. It was the most loving people in it. So here is the part I want you to actually sit with tonight. You think you are nothing like them. You think the skull cup belongs to some darker, crueler, more primitive kind of human that you have long since evolved past and left behind. But look, honestly, at what you already do. You keep ashes in a jar on the mantelpiece in the middle of your living room. You wear a locket with a lock of a dead person's hair pressed inside it. You save old voicemails for years, just to hear a voice that's gone say your name one more time. You drive across a city to stand in front of a slab of polished stone in the grass, and you talk to it, out loud, like someone on the other side is still listening. Every single one of those things is the exact same instinct that shaped a human skull into a cup 14,000 years ago. The same refusal to let a person you love simply vanish from the world. The same desperate need to keep one piece of them here, among the living, where you can still reach it. Look across the entire human world, and you'll find that same trembling instinct wearing 1,000 different masks. The ancient Egyptians wrapped their dead in linen and poured out fortunes trying to keep the body perfect for eternity. Tibetan monks carry their dead up the mountain and offer them to the sky and the birds. Some peoples burn the body and keep the ashes in a jar. Some raise great stone tombs that last for thousands of years. Some keep nothing but a single photograph on the wall and light one candle beside it once a year. Sky burial, mummification, cremation, a locket of hair, a skull beside the fire. Strip away the method every single time, and underneath all of it is the exact same human heart, shaking, refusing to accept that someone is truly gone. The skull cup was never the strange one in that list. It was just the most honest. They were not less human than you. If anything, they were more honest than you. More honest about the one thing that every single one of us spends an entire lifetime trying not to look directly at. They held death in their bare hands instead of paying to hide it in a building across town. And they answered it with the only tools they had in the whole world: their fire, their stone, and their own bodies. So the next time you hear the word cannibal, and your mind paints a snarling savage, I want you to picture this instead. A person in a freezing cave at the tail end of the Ice Age, hands shaking, eyes wet, carefully shaping the skull of someone they loved more than their own life. Because the thought of laying that person down in the cold, dark ground and just walking away was the single thing in this world they could not bring themselves to do. So is keeping someone's ashes on a shelf really so different from keeping their skull beside the fire? Or did we just invent a cleaner, quieter way of doing the exact same ancient thing. Tell me honestly what you think down in the comments, because I've gone back and forth on this 100 times and I still can't decide. And if this rewired something in your head, if you know you'll never walk past a graveyard the same way again, then subscribe. Because there's a whole buried history of who we used to be, hiding right under our feet. And we are only just beginning to dig it up.